I grew up in a small town where the days were long and the opportunities were scarce. My mother, a resilient woman, taught me that life would never be easy. She never had luxuries or resources, but her strength was never measured by material things. I remember the way she looked at me with that resolute gaze, always saying, "You'll succeed, but it will be through effort, not luck." And somehow she made me believe it. Even though her words often sounded harsh, I knew there was love in each of them. Life was a constant struggle, but she made me understand that it was what would make me strong. I felt trapped within that logic, and my teenage years were marked by an insatiable desire for freedom. School, my circle of friends, and expectations always seemed to confine me. I wanted more. I wanted to experience the world beyond the walls my mother had built around me. But she left no room for questioning. To her, respecting those rules was fundamental, and my role was to follow them. Of course, there were moments of discomfort when I wondered if it would always be this way. If I would always have to be the obedient daughter who sacrificed her desires for what was deemed right. I'll never forget the moment I met Raphael. He appeared like a ray of sunshine, lighting up everything around me. He had a lightness about him, a perspective on life so different from mine that it felt like he could free me from the confined space where I felt stuck. He didn't ask questions or demand explanations. He simply invited me to live and see the world through different eyes. He would say, "Life is more than hard work, Carmem. It's also about enjoying it, about being happy in the moment." I laughed the first time he said it, thinking it was just a distant dream. But over time, something inside me opened up. Something I never knew existed. He gave me a sense of freedom my mother could never offer. And in his arms, I saw a future full of promise and possibilities. At 22, I became pregnant with Gabriel. It was a surprise, a shock even, but at the same time, it was a promise of a new beginning. Raphael and I were just starting to explore what we could build together, and Gabriel's arrival seemed like a new adventure. That baby meant everything. I was determined to be a different kind of mother, more loving, more understanding. I wanted to give him what I never had, a world without limitations, free from the barriers I had known. But fate, as always, had other plans. Raphael died in a tragic accident months before Gabriel's birth, and suddenly, the world turned into a sphere of pain and fear. I was alone. The man I loved, who had taught me to see life differently, was no longer there to support me. And on a cold November night, when the news came, it felt like my soul had been ripped from me. The emptiness was so profound that I wondered if I could survive, but something within me stayed firm. I couldn't give up. I had Gabriel, and he needed me. I couldn't let the void consume me completely. And so, at 23, I found myself a mother, a widow, and utterly alone. There was no room for lamentation. I had no choice but to keep going, even under the weight of unbearable pain. Gabriel became the center of my universe, and I silently vowed to do my best for him, that he would have everything I never had. But Raphael's absence haunted me in every decision, every step I took. What went through my mind at that time? If I had been different, would Raphael have stayed? Could I have changed the course of my life and avoided this pain? Then the weight of my choices became even clearer. But from that moment, when Gabriel was born, my greatest fear came true. I became what I always dreaded, a woman who, despite loving intensely, had to be strong in ways I never imagined. Now, I knew it wasn't just about being a mother. It was about surviving, and about ensuring that my son would never feel the weight of the same loneliness I had felt. What else could happen? How would life surprise me again? Gabriel was the sole reason I kept going. No matter how exhausted or broken I was inside, he was my reason to live. I watched him grow, and each of his smiles, every gesture of affection was like a light guiding my path. He wasn't to blame for Raphael's absence, but I felt that the love I had for him should be enough to fill the void. And in many moments, I truly believed I was doing my best. I raised him with the principles my mother had taught me: hard work, respect, and honesty. I firmly believed he would grow up understanding these values, following the right path, and avoiding the mistakes I feared. But reality was far more complex. As he grew, I began noticing changes in him. From a young age, Gabriel had a curious gaze, a restless mind, always wanting more than the simple life had to offer. At first, this seemed like an advantage. He had a rare intelligence, a knack for business that many other young people lacked. But as he matured, his ambition began to take a turn that frightened me. I watched him drift away from the values I had tried so hard to instill in him, as if honesty and effort had been replaced by something darker, something I couldn't understand. There was a time during his teenage years when I started noticing signs that he wasn't being entirely honest with me. I found strange things, small details that didn't fit into the stories he told me. I confronted him, but he always had an explanation. "Mom, it's not what you think. I'm just trying to do my best." But it was impossible to ignore what was happening. There was something there that wasn't right, something brewing beneath the surface, something I didn't want to see but somehow knew was real. I often wondered, did I fail somewhere along the way? Did my rigidity, the way I raised him, push him away from the values I held so dearly? I blamed myself. If he had obeyed me, if I had been more flexible, maybe he would have made different choices. The weight of this doubt consumed me, corroding me from within as I tried to ignore the pain of watching my son drift away. Something deep inside me screamed that he was losing himself, that he was heading down a dangerous path. Yet, on the other hand, I knew he was a smart young man, capable of conquering the world if he chose the right direction. When he entered college and later started working at a prestigious company, I tried to trust that he would make the right choices. He seemed to be doing well, establishing himself, with a promising future ahead. But at the same time, there was a growing distance between us. He no longer shared much about his life, and when he did talk about his career, his expression was different, as though he was playing a game I couldn't understand. I felt the pressure weighing on me, trying to balance unconditional love with the fear that he was losing his way. Then something happened. I'm not entirely sure what triggered my suspicion, but something felt off. I was in my office reviewing some case files when I accidentally came across a bank statement that wasn't mine. I stood there, frozen, feeling my heart race as I scanned the transactions. And then, the truth hit me like an unbearable weight. Gabriel was embezzling money. What I had feared all along, what I had somehow always known deep down, was now staring me in the face. Numbers, irrefutable evidence. The shock was so overwhelming I could barely breathe. How could he do this? How could I have been so blind? I had always believed that honesty and hard work were the pillars of everything he should aspire to be. Now, I saw the son I loved, the son I had raised, dismantling everything I had tried to teach him. I felt betrayed, hurt in a way I never thought possible. How could I have been so naive? I asked myself. But deep down, I knew this was the one truth I could no longer ignore. In that moment, between the cold pages of documents that revealed his deception, something else was born within me. I knew I couldn't let this slide. I had to act. I had to correct his mistake, even if it meant shattering the fragile trust that still existed between us. But before anything else, I asked myself, does he still respect me? Is there still something I can do to guide him back? The decision lay before me, a difficult choice that could separate us forever. What would I do now? I knew he needed to learn his lesson, but I also knew this could break something between us that could never be mended. The realization struck like an electric shock, a direct blow to my chest. The truth spread through me, freezing my thoughts. I stood there before the computer screen, the bank statement glaring back at me, and the reality of what my son was doing crushed me. I had suspected it before, but the confirmation was something I could never have anticipated. Gabriel, my son, was embezzling money from the company where he worked. The despair of knowing this left me speechless, breathless. The weight of his betrayal hit me with such depth that it was hard to even process. I knew him so well. How could he do this? How could I have been so blind to the changes in his behavior? I had watched him grow, spent countless nights caring for him, dedicating myself to ensure he had everything he needed. And now, this. I never imagined he could be capable of something so underhanded, so dishonest. All those years I had taught him the value of hard work, honesty, and integrity. Yet somewhere along the way, he lost his way. The worst part was realizing that deep down, he may have never truly respected me. Was it me who failed him? That question haunted me, lingering in my mind at every moment. Had the choices I made, the lessons I taught him, been insufficient to prevent this fall? On that screen, in those cold, impersonal documents, I saw the extent of his actions. The embezzlement was significant, far more than I could have imagined. I sat there, paralyzed, my eyes locked on the numbers, trying to understand how he thought he could get away with it. The anger mingled with the pain was almost unbearable. But as the anger grew, another emotion emerged within me. Responsibility. He was my son, and somehow I still believed that, despite everything, I could help him change. However, I knew I couldn't condone what he had done. He needed to learn, and the only way to do that was by facing the consequences. But how exactly would I do that? The dilemma consumed my thoughts. I knew that doing the right thing could destroy whatever was left of our relationship, but at the same time, I knew I couldn't stay passive. If I didn't act, he would continue, believing everything was fine. I looked at the papers on my desk, my eyes still fixed on the illicit transactions he had made, and the sense of helplessness overwhelmed me for a moment. I never imagined that a mother's love could be so severely tested. Would he understand why I was doing this? Would he forgive me one day? I wondered, trying to envision what life would look like after making such a difficult decision. The most painful part was knowing, deep down, that he wouldn't see this as an attempt to help him. No, to him, I would just be a mother trying to ruin his life. I was no longer the woman he respected. I was just someone interfering in his freedom, in his journey. But the truth, as painful as it was that he had chosen this path. He had chosen the path of disrespect, of lies, of betrayal. It was hard to imagine that the same boy I had raised with so much love had become someone so far removed from everything I believed to be right. The pain of betrayal didn't just come from the discovery, but from the emptiness it left where trust used to be. I constantly asked myself, did he know how much I trusted him? Or had he always known that I could never see his truth? As a mother, I wanted to protect him, but as a woman, I knew I needed to act, to confront him. I spent hours that night, sitting in silence, staring at the documents, imagining what Gabriel's future would look like after my intervention. I didn't want him to go to prison, didn't want him to lose everything he had achieved so far. But what he did couldn't go unpunished. Something had to change. I needed to be strong, stronger than ever. I can't let him get away with this. Those words echoed in my mind as I made a decision that would forever alter our relationship. The next morning, after a sleepless night, I knew what I had to do. I had no more doubts. I would report him. It didn't matter the emotional cost, nor the pain it would cause. He needed to learn. I needed to ensure he understood what was truly at stake. And as hard as it would be, I knew this was the only way to help him change, to restore what remained of the dignity he had lost. As I prepared to act, one question lingered in my mind. Does he still see me as his mother, or have I become just an enemy in his life? The answer would come, somehow, but for now, I had to do what was right. And what was right, I knew, would be a harsh blow for both of us. The decision was made, but nothing about it was easy. I knew that by doing what I was about to do, my life would never be the same. And more than that, Gabriel's life would never be the same either. I loved him, and that love drove me to act in ways he would never understand. Not now, at least. But at the same time, the pain of seeing what little remained between us unravel was consuming me. As a mother, I wanted to protect him, but the reality was that he needed to face the consequences of his mistakes. It was the only way to teach him something he would not learn otherwise. I filed the report anonymously. It was something I did without hesitation. But the moment I did, a part of me wanted to take it back. The thought of seeing my son in prison tore me apart, but I knew that doing nothing would only enable him to ruin more lives. He needed to be stopped before the hole he was digging for himself became deeper. The pain of loss I had carried since Raphael's death now felt small compared to the agony of losing the son I once knew, the son who had been mine. The weeks that followed were a nightmare. The investigation didn't take long to uncover what I already knew, and soon Gabriel was arrested. The news hit me like a punch to the stomach. I knew he had made a mistake, but I never imagined it would all unfold so quickly. Fear gripped me, a sense of powerlessness and a weight on my soul that I couldn't shake. Even though I had acted justly, the impact of my decision weighed on me like a boulder on my chest. I couldn't meet Gabriel's eyes when I visited him in prison. He looked like a stranger, a distorted version of the son I once knew. There he was, behind bars, someone I never thought I'd see in such a place. The air smelled of despair. The sound of chains and metal doors echoed, and everything about it made me feel that this wasn't just a physical prison, but a prison of the soul. The pain of seeing him there was unbearable, but I knew it was what he needed, even if he couldn't understand it. When I finally entered the visitation room, his eyes locked onto mine, and for a moment, I felt a surge of anger I hadn't known existed. Gabriel's face was marked with the weight of guilt, but there was something else there, something I couldn't identify. He looked at me as if I were the one responsible for everything, as if he wasn't the one to blame. The pain of being seen as the enemy, the villain of the story, cut deeper than I ever imagined, but I couldn't waver. "Did you really think you'd get away with it?" I couldn't stop the words from coming out harshly, with a coldness that surprised even me. "Did you think you could humiliate me and keep going? Now you'll pay for everything, son. For the slap, for the lies, for the money you stole from the company. I'm your mother, and as hard as it is, I want what's best for you. That's why I'll gladly see you pay for your mistakes." The words came out with a precision that scared me. I knew in that moment it was what he needed to hear. He didn't want to hear it, but he needed to. He needed to understand that life wouldn't treat him with the indulgence he expected. And I, more than anyone, knew that. I stood there watching him, waiting for a reaction. A part of me hoped he would show some remorse, that he would come to his senses and admit it had all been a mistake. But that's not what happened. Instead, he looked at me with a restrained anger, a fury that seemed greater than his pain. He said nothing, but his eyes spoke louder than any words. He was blaming me for putting him in that place, for being the reason he had lost everything. Does he really see me like this? As the villain? I asked myself. But I knew it didn't matter. I stood up, feeling the weight of that visit crushing me. Before leaving, I looked at him one last time, unsure of what else could be said. Will he ever understand what I did for him? When he gets out, will he remember who I am, the mother who always loved him? There were no answers to these questions. only the heavy silence that filled the space between us. I walked away, leaving the prison, and with every step I took, I felt the decision consuming me a little more. But I knew there was no turning back. I had done what needed to be done. As I walked to my car, a strange mix of relief and pain swirled in my mind. Did I do the right thing? The doubt still haunted me, but there was no room for it. What I did was the only possible path, not just for him, but for me as well. I knew that when he got out of prison, the pain he felt now would have transformed into something else. He would understand, perhaps, the weight of what we had gone through, and maybe, just maybe, he would come to see the value of what he once rejected. What would happen after that? Only time would tell. Months passed since that visit to Gabriel. I hadn't seen him since that day in prison, and life continued to rearrange itself around me in ways I couldn't predict. When I left that visit, the weight of everything I had done crushed me, but as time went on, a strange sense of relief began to take hold. Perhaps it was the understanding that I had done what needed to be done, or perhaps it was the realization that finally, I was starting to reclaim my own life. At first, I wondered why I felt an unsettling peace. It seemed that, in some way, the decision to put my son behind bars had also freed me. The pain didn't vanish immediately. It still lingered, especially when I thought about what Gabriel might be feeling, the loneliness and regret I knew he would face eventually. Yet, at the same time, I understood he needed to go through it. Life wouldn't be any kinder to him if I hadn't been firm. The restart came in a simple, almost imperceptible way. Gradually, I poured myself into my work with renewed intensity and began seeing the world through different eyes. I was no longer trapped in a past filled with loss and regret. The weight of motherhood, the guilt of wanting to protect a son who refused to see what was right, had finally eased. I had done all I could. That moment had been my chance to do what was right without worrying about the personal consequences. And now, all that remained was to move forward. But one question lingered in my mind. What about Gabriel? What will become of him now? I knew he would still have to face the consequences of it all. Prison wasn't an end, it was a new beginning. I hoped, with a painful kind of anticipation, that he would emerge changed. That upon leaving that place, he would understand what he had done and what I had done for him. Forgiveness was a possibility, but not a guarantee. Everything depended on him, on how he would face this new version of himself. Finally, after a long period of silence, I received word that Gabriel would be released. He had served his sentence, and time had done the work of a forced awakening. I was nervous. What would it be like to see him again? Would he be the same? Would he still be angry with me? Or perhaps would he finally understand? When he appeared at my door, he looked like a different man. There was something darker in his eyes, something more mature, but also an undeniable emptiness. He was thinner, more tired, as if his time in prison had stripped something essential from him. He didn't smile. He didn't look at me with that confident gaze I remembered from the past. When our eyes met, it was as if time had frozen. He said nothing, and I didn't know what to say either. The silence between us was profound and heavy, but he was the first to break it. I don't understand, Mom," he said, his voice laden with exhaustion and pain. "Why did you do it? Why did you turn me in? I know what I did was wrong, but I don't know if I can forgive that." I looked at him, and for a moment, I saw myself in him. The same boy I had once tried to protect was now standing there, trying to make sense of the pain he had caused, pain he had inflicted on all of us. I took a deep breath, and with a calmness I didn't know I possessed, I said, "Because you needed to learn, Gabriel. You needed to understand that you couldn't keep destroying everything. I love you, but love also requires us to do what's right, even when it hurts. And now, son, you need to rebuild your life." There was something broken in him, something that couldn't be quickly mended. But at the same time, something in his posture began to shift. I knew he was still processing everything that had happened, but at that moment, something important had been said. I hadn't abandoned him, never had, but he needed to take responsibility for his own recovery. In the months that followed, Gabriel began trying to rebuild his life. He looked for a job, and slowly he started dealing with the consequences of his actions. It wasn't easy. He distanced himself from many of the people he had been involved with, and even with all his efforts to find a new path, he carried something with him that couldn't be erased. But for the first time, I saw genuine effort on his part. He began learning humility, working with his own hands, and understanding that the choices we make don't only affect us, they ripple out to everyone around us. As for me, I began finding a new rhythm to my life. Time, with all its changes, led me to new horizons. I became calmer, more focused on what truly mattered. The pain of loss, of seeing my son lost, gave way to hope. I had fulfilled my role as a mother. I had guided him along what I believed was the right path, and the rest was now up to him. And as I looked to the future, I understood that everything we had gone through, all the choices we had made, were part of the process of becoming who we were meant to be. Life isn't made of guarantees or easy roads, but of choices. Some are right, others wrong, but all are necessary. I had done what I needed to do, and he, finally, was starting to do the same. The story of Gabriel and me, a mother and her son, was still being written. But what remained, as difficult as it was the certainty that both of us had learned something important. Love, pain, regret, justice. All of it was now intertwined in ways I never could have imagined. And in the end, it was this that allowed me to move forward, with the hope that one day, Gabriel would also understand the value of everything we had done, and finally, forgive himself.